There we are. Hello, I'm Jen Toksvig and we are live on YouTube. I say that every time like it's a thing because it pleases me. I'm with the lovely Annette Mees of Coney. Say hello, Annette.
Hi, everyone.
The lovely Holly Gramazio of Making Amazing Games That Make People Happy.
Hello.
Hi, Holly. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So I was hoping to talk to you about grabbing an audience's attention, ways to engage audiences. So we're making this thing, tiny shows, where too many people will be in a building writing fast over a weekend, performing, learning, performing, improvising, devising, making tiny little musicals. And because we are presenting it in a building, because it's sort of site-specific, and there's 3 floors that we're using, and they have different rooms, and there's staircases and corridors and toilets and all kinds of space. And also there will be multiple shows happening in the same spaces. I thought that one of our opportunities to take risks as writers might be different ways to engage an audience in that sort of site-specific way. So if you could both just tell me a little bit about the work that you have made that happens in that sort of way. And I know that some of it is not theatre but gaming, and some of it is crossover stuff. But Annette, do you want to talk first actually about Coney and the kind of work that you do in that sort of vein?
Well, my work is places audiences really in the role of the hero. So we make cross-disciplinary and theatrical work in which the narrative is responsive to the audience. So they are in it. The story changes because they are there, and it matters who's there. So for example, we've just toured a show called Early Days of a Better Nation, in which the audience, in a run-up to the elections, build a new nation each night. So they entered a fictional nation called Dacia, which was in complete ruins after years of civil war and an oppressive regime, and they are at the start of rebuilding it. So each night, the story is completely different depending on what people come up with, where the emphasis lies, but it has a very strong and developed over a long period of time dramaturgical structure that makes each evening interesting and keeps it
fresh.
Copies.
Do you find that having that structure helps people to play, having something set up within which they can imagine? Does that help?
Yeah, so Tom and I spend a lot of time on the layer of fiction. What is the layer of fiction that allows for really playful engagement, yet also takes it away from reality? So we're really interested, both Tom and I, in the idea of truthful fiction, or fiction that's near the truth. So we've worked very deeply in this show, for example, with academics, to look at different political structures which have existed or theoretically existed. We've interviewed MPs about their role in politics and how they experience the transition of idealism into having to enter negotiation states. We worked with the House of Parliament on how they teach democracy and what's important about it. So we work very hard to create a very truthful structure that's based in reality but has a fictional factor, a fictional layer that allows us to step away from I like to call it the hobby horses. You know, everyone knows their opinion about the NHS, but what is more important, security or health, and discuss that.
Holly, the work that you've made is, I've seen work that is less fiction-based. Is that true?
Yes. I don't tend to make things, at least physical event-based things, where people are that deeply immersed in a fictional world. I tend to make things that are about the specific place where the game happens to be, say, and about finding something in that environment to respond to and to play within. Generally speaking, I don't ask people to be characters. I ask them to be versions of themselves, stronger or braver or more treacherous, or find the version of themselves that they want to be for the purposes of the game.
Is that true?
we want people. We never ask people to be a character, but it's you. It's you who happens to run a country right now. What will you do in this, rather than trying to imagine what a third person would be?
Yeah. So Holly, I guess that's the same thing, isn't it? You're asking people to be the hero version of themselves in whatever given situation that is.
Yeah, or sometimes a terrible version of themselves, right? Because people have to be terrible sometimes within a safe or a safe-ish context where probably people won't get too angry about it. They've decided that for the purpose of the next 5 minutes or the next couple of hours, it's probably okay to lie to your friends.
Those are the best games. So I guess my question then is, in terms of tiny shows and what we're doing. So we're using a big story that I'm not going to reveal. I keep nearly saying it. I'm keeping it a secret. So I've used as my dummy story The Wizard of Oz because it's fine. Then I know what I'm referring to and I don't accidentally give the story away. So in The Wizard of Oz, if that's the big story that we're using for the weekend, we're breaking it down into tiny little moments. Character relationships is the big map that we're making, a big map of all the people in the story and how they relate to one another and where they encounter one another. And those joining places where those lines join are moments that I hope people will choose to make into tiny shows. So so if that's our structure, that's our narrative structure, I'm interested in how people, in ways in which we might take risks with engaging the audience. So we might start by saying, I would like to make the audience feel X or experience Y, and therefore what kind of story am I looking to tell? Is that a good way for them to do it? How might that work?
Well, I think a starting point might be, what do you want from the audience? How are they part of it? Who are they in this world? What is their role in this world?
Is that something that we should let them decide? I mean, Holly, if you're saying this is a game about lying to your friends, then you're defining that role for them in some way. But Annette, if you're saying your job is to rebuild a nation, you're kind of not defining whether or not they can be villains or heroes in that way, are you? You're just saying what does that involve? So there's more complexity in that. So what are the differences to an audience?
But the audience in that does have a role. They have an objective. So they can choose. So keeping early days as the example, we see people play very differently. So some people try on political attitudes they would never display outside, and other people stay very close to their own political principles and want to play that out. And some people become very tribal, and so we design for a whole range of behaviors which can be incredibly active or a little bit more passive, and allow space to try out things very close to yourself and a little bit further away from yourself. But we do give a framework. They have quite clear objectives, so just Stanislavskian objectives, which gives them something to do. Because I think for an audience to have agency, for an audience to be able to play or to do, they need to have a reason to do so. I think when an audience gets lost, that's where
their goal.
Yeah, I think that's
Holly, if you're saying to people that when they play this game, what kind of goals are you setting up for them?
Generally speaking, goals can be really useful for distracting people from while you get them to do what you really want them to do. Often I'll have an image or an emotion or something that I want people to do or feel, like a moment, and then the rules and the goals that I'm giving people are back-formed from there. If I want people to be pulling someone else into a dark corner and passing them a poem and a rubber duck, what is the rule structure that
will achieve that?
That's a perfectly natural part of play.
So I guess, I mean, that's the same as writing a musical. You know, if I want a character to, if I want an audience to emotionally connect with a character in a sorrowful way at one point or other, I will therefore set up a sad song, and, you know, it's a ballad, and those are the choices I'm making, and I know how people respond to songs in that. So that's the same kind of thing, I suppose. If I wanted to make a musical where I wanted my audience to be surprised, but my audience are right next to my characters, then I can have a character actually sneak up behind them and say boo. You know, that's just a different set of tools, I guess, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like creative choices. You build layers of creative choices on top of each other.
So is there a thing that people tend to default to? I suppose what I'm saying is my first instinct is always to talk about the story, to think about the characters. So my first instinct is always to go, who is this? Who's this a story about? And what is it they want? And then I'll make choices about the song where they express what they want, and those sort of standard things. Whereas what happens if you come at things from left field? What does that do to your work if you go, hang on, let's not think about the story, let's think about the audience? How does that change your work, I suppose?
I don't think that we necessarily. I mean, it's a difficult question, this, because I don't believe that I have a very singular path from A to Z. I've come at different projects from very different angles, but I think it's seldomly. Well, no, actually, it's not true. But very often, it's not the audience, because there's something you want to achieve, or something you want to create, something that you want to say or tell, or an experience you want to build. And as Holly said, if you... Oh, I've got an echo of a second, which is a bit annoying. You try and figure out what the ingredients are to create the emotion, the narrative, the arc that you want people to go on. So maybe arc is a nice way of thinking about it, because the audience, if they become part of it, if they're not behind the fourth wall, they are going on their own journey. So what are the steps of that? What are the beats? What are the scenes and in the scenes beats there?
I'm just wondering what we can do about that echo. I don't suppose anybody has another device on at the moment, do they?
No.
It's just an echo on the line then. Annette, I might suggest that you hang up and re-click the link, and let's see if that does it.
Yeah. I'll come back to you in a sec.
Okay. Do we still have an echo? Yeah, we do.
Oh, I couldn't hear the echo anyway.
I have one. Okay, so talk to me about arc in a game.
Huh.
Hello, lovely.
Hello.
I think it might be me.
You now have an echo.
And you can't hang up and rejoin because it would destroy the whole chat.
Yeah, we'll just deal with it.
Okay. I think with games it's interesting because it's quite difficult to manage a situation where you can change the rules of the game in the middle of the game. It is possible, but generally speaking, it's quite hard to do that in a way that leaves players happy and okay with it. So if it's a game that's mainly mechanical rather than story-based, having an arc there kind of has to come out of the interactions of the narrative, not of the narrative, of the mechanics and the players, and it's arcs like someone is going well and then they're going poorly, or someone is using this sort of set of techniques because they think it's going to help them win, and then they change their mind and do something else. It's not necessarily a thing that you can predict or lay out or separate from the actual group of people who are playing the game. It's just about setting up the systems that allow those arcs to emerge and the players to have their own experiences of it.
Their own narrative. I guess
so I say that I often make stuff that isn't very narrative heavy, but that there's often not much of a narrative world for people to enter. There's just enough of a sketch of it to make the game rules make sense sometimes. But then they come out of it ideally with a story which is based on their own gameplay. It's a thing where here is this clever thing that they did, here is this time they sacrificed themselves for the good of their teammates. It's like a thing that emerges from the choices they make. So they construct their own out.
I often think that if you're presenting a character to an immersive audience, that there's that instinct, isn't there, as a writer, to just create narrative or create dialogue or at least shape what's going to happen in that scene. But if you just put a character in a room with a bunch of people and you say, this is horrible, you could talk to her, they're going to make their own story. I mean, it's as simple as that. If I just put a character in front of you and go, this is the lion from The Wizard of Oz, and you can talk to him. That's all I need to do for a thing to happen.
Yeah, it's just about how much you want to affect or what is going to happen, because you can send the lion with a very strong objective or a very weak objective or a narrative thrust, and you can send the audience in with a strong objective or no objective or weak objective. Or that interaction can be interrupted and completely sidelined by something that has more dramatic urgency.
So I could say, here's the lion, you can talk to him. And then I could say to the lion, your objective is to make an enemy in the room. Or your objective is to find out a secret about the scarecrow from someone. Or whatever. And then that is a tool. It's a game-playing rule. Holly?
Yeah. I think in terms of people, like stories that form organically within a game as well, there's a term that I learnt from Grant Howard and Mary Hamilton called froth, which role-playing gamers and live-action role-players use, apparently, which is like froth is the bit where you finish a game and talk about it, or you have a break from the game and you say, oh, I did this and I did that and that bit was amazing. It's a sort of the excited babble once the game is over. And it's not just that it's a satisfying thing in itself, it's also, this is partly the method whereby people form their own narrative out of the things they did and the stuff they remember and form that into a shape that they can remember and have emotions about, because you're never going to remember every single moment in it, right? You're going to remember the things that fit into your story of who you were within that game or that show and the things that you encountered. So a thing that Grant and Mary sometimes do with their games is have that built into it afterwards. So before people go in and play, there's a bit where you sit down and get them working together as a team or developing little enmities. Then you send them into the game, and then afterwards, in an almost casual so that they don't notice it, wait, there's 10 minutes where you sit them down and they talk to each other about what they did and how it went. And that is a key part of how they build their understanding of the choices they made and why they made those choices, which isn't a thing that I've ever really done myself. I find super interesting that
we do something really similar. We talk about thresholding. What are the thresholds between the outside world and the narrative world? So how do you create space where people slowly capitulate into a world rather than being thrust into it? And how do you build a threshold where people can hang out for as long as they want together? And we often just serve drinks. That's often enough to keep people together.
You just serve drinks, did you say?
So with Small Town, another show we did, we literally served drinks and had a little bar, which is the historian's office. The historian was a sort of framing character. So it was still sort of in show, but also not in show. And it was this reflective space. With early days, we had an end where we asked questions and people reflected on their responses and how it related to politics. and then invite them to come to the bar.
This makes me think, Annette, of the stuff that I scratched with Coney that one time at Camden People's Theatre, accompanying, and the notion of what it does to an audience member to have somebody walking around the space with them, asking them questions and listening to them talk about the experience as they have it. That there is an option for writers to say, you can only watch this show if you're standing next to someone and you're having a conversation about it, or options for writers to say to a character, this show is improvised and you're going to have a conversation with the audience and that's what it is, and the goal is to get them to talk to each other, not to talk to you. Ideally.
I think very much like a normal play or a normal narrative. I think it's about the rhythm of that, because I think I quite like pieces where reflection and action are both present, and there's sort of an ebb and flow between that, and there's a sort of structure that allows for that. But also, I think that needs to be built quite carefully, because reflection often takes much longer than the actual action.
Yeah.
So what does that do to the ebb and flow of your experience as a whole? It's a rhythm thing.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? And also, it's about not needing so much structure. If about having the right legs to support that, but not overfilling it, not trying to carve out the narrative exactly, not trying to lead it too much.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like, if you allow your audience agency, if you allow them to be part of it, let them be part of it. Don't just make them press the red button when the red button needs to be pressed, and the blue button when the blue button needs to be pressed.
Yeah.
That feels tokenistic, and it's unless you've got a very good reason to do it, why not just let a character do it so that I can relax and watch something beautiful?
Holly, your stuff doesn't work without people playing, does it? I mean, gaming is literally the extreme of immersive theatre, isn't it?
Yeah. Games exist in our mutual agreement to pretend we care about something that we don't really care about, and then agree to restrict the ways that we're going to go about trying to achieve that. Like, the example I love is that, like, with chess, we agree that we really care about turning your opponent's little plastic king on its side. No one cares about that. And then we agree that even though we're pretending that we really, really care about that, we can't just grab the opponent's king and tip it over. We've got to go through this weird rigmarole where we move pieces around in different peculiar angles and all sorts. And yeah, there are things that are brought into being by people's participation in them, or in some cases their sort of consideration of them, in the same way as a poem. You can encounter a game rule set as something where you read it and think about it, and it encapsulates an angle on the world or a thing noticed about the world, and you can think about that without necessarily having to play. But yeah, generally speaking, it's like, and I don't think about the word audience as a sort of a primary thing very often. I think about players, and also people who are nearby, passers-by or whatever, people who can potentially be drawn into playing, and what the experience is like to be near a game is also important. But for me, what the experience is like to be playing the game is always the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is something of that in the wandering around the building for tiny shows, that people will be sort of passing things on their way to something else. And there's just something very beautiful about that. Also, there's something very beautiful for me about what you just said about reading rules and having thoughts about those things, or, that you don't have to play the actual game. There's something lovely for me that an audience member doesn't have to be standing in front of a person singing a song to enjoy it, that they can overhear it from the corridor outside and enjoy it. And that there might be one of their froth things that they said, oh, I overheard this beautiful lilting air coming from upstairs and it was gorgeous. And, that gave them some experience that was lovely for them. And what's that gorgeous game where you have picture cards and it's about telling the story that's like the picture on the card?
Dixit, I think you're thinking of, board game.
Where it's just about creating your own story by a picture, and I think there's no reason why theatre can't do that as well. That you present a picture of something and then invite the player to describe that thing. So is there something in the telling of a story that it happens on the audience's journey from one place to another? Maybe. Annette, is there some of that in yours? Is there some journeying storytelling that goes on?
Yeah, I think Holly described it really nicely before. I think when the audience becomes part of it, they go on the journey, and their role within it, and what they did, and how they moved through it, and what they thought, and how they responded to it becomes their story. So I think, especially with this sort of roaming audience, I think I would think very much about that sort of 360-degree staging, because they can come from different ways. And what is the mise en scène? What does it block off? What are the sidelines of people coming in when a show is with an audience? Like, the audience becomes part of the mise en scène. They become extras or even important protagonists or antagonists within the narrative. And what does that look like from someone who's just walked in, that are very, very far removed, for someone who's watching that and is engaged but not necessarily participating? What does it look like when you're participating? Can you make images, narrative images, that work on those three layers?
Yeah, that we should be thinking not just about who else is writing a song in this same room as we are, and how loudly they're going to be singing and how that affects us, and how we can maybe work together on that moment. But also,
if it is there, use it.
Yeah.
The fact that you can't hear your own song because someone else is doing it, so use it rather than respond to it. I think Holly and I, when you're working in such a thing, I think Holly and I shared sort of the attitude of looking what is there and using it, incorporating it, and responding to it, rather than trying to smooth everything out.
Yeah.
I also make things in black boxes so I could just get to paint the world. But when I can't, then work with there, I think, because your audience is not going to ignore it. So if you ignore it, it's really weird.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Holly, I just wanted to ask you, because I know you have to run away. When you walk into a space that you're going to work in for the first time, what do you look for? What do you look at?
I look for the things that are most peculiar about that space and what things they afford. Like, you know how every primary school has that weird game that you can only play on a particular set of steps that happens to curl up around a fence that goes this particular way, and then there's that tree, and actually that one time somebody pulled a branch off and you couldn't play it for the next 6 months and then a new branch grew or whatever. The things that are like that, the things that make the space uniquely its own space, and sometimes those are things like unexpected length or height, sometimes it's about sight lines, sometimes it's about patterns or colours, but the stuff that makes it unusual, really, what is the thing that, if you took a photo of it, would enable you to instantly recognise this space? Is it a texture? Is it a particular paving stone? Is it the way there's cracks on half of the room and not on the other half of the room?
Yeah, as Annette says, whatever's there, to embrace it and acknowledge it and use it rather than try.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It can be interesting to break it. So sometimes when I work in a space, I look at how people move through it naturally, and then I think about. So I did a big project in Kensington Palace, and people walked through the door to the middle of the space, looked around, looked up, down, around, and then walked straight to the next door. And then, so for us, it then became about, okay, so how do we interestingly break that pattern without sort of going, hello, we don't want you to move like that, but actually create a framework in which people naturally started moving differently within that space, and therefore actually that space changed, that the meaning of that space changed before we created, we whispered a lot in that space, and now people talked. And all those, like, there might be behaviors that we want to break or shift, and actually this kind of work's really good at that as well. This is on top of use all the peculiarities, and I completely agree with Holly, but I think it's a nice addition to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly,
I have to run off now, I'm afraid.
No, but thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Yeah, I had a really lovely time.
Thank you, sweetheart, and I will hopefully see you soon. We won't be offended if you hang up. I would like to chat to you in a few more minutes.
See you soon, I hope. Bye.
Bye, darling.
Thanks, Holly.
Hello, lovely.
Hello.
Have you got another few minutes?
Yeah.
Has your echo now gone?
Yes, actually.
I think it might have been coming from Holly.
Hallelujah.
So yes, okay. So looking at how the space is unique and making use of that, looking at how people naturally behave in the space, that's really interesting. Also sound, echoes in spaces and sound chambers and what kind of sound chamber it is, and playing with that and making use of that or commenting on it, whispering. I love whispering. And I've said that the tiny shows can be anything from 6 minutes down to 6 seconds long. And I'm going to write a 6-second musical where someone just whispers it in your ear as you're passing, because I just think those passing things are beautiful and have the potential to be carried through the space. I think that's what really excites me, is that carrying stories from one place to another, because I think the froth will happen. Surely the froth happens in between each little tiny episode that you encounter as well. So it becomes part of the bigger arc of your journey and informs the next thing that you see. And
yeah, I think you've got a natural ebb and flow by definition, because you've got a multitude of experiences and journeys in between it. So I think there's already a natural rhythm to that, and I think it's once you've established how that feels, how the journey and different journeys through the space feels, then you might want to fill some of those gaps or leave them open, because they're really important as reflection time. And
also spaces, leaving spaces, not filling every corner with a story is a really good thing. Leaving some space so the audience have somewhere to gather if they feel awkward, they need a break, they want to chat, they want to have a look around and not be engaged by anything. That stuff I think has got to be important too, right? When you're deciding what's going on in your room and what you're going to present and how you're going to use the space. Oh, did I lose you? You've totally frozen. Hello. Oh no. We might have to end there if I've lost Annette. I might try and get Annette back. Are you there? Live broadcasting on the internet. Okay, I'm going to head out because I think I might have lost Annette. So hopefully you enjoyed this provocation, stilted though it was. And these are the joys of YouTube live broadcasting. I wonder if she's going to come back. No. Okay. So I might try and see if I can spend some more time with Annette at some point, because everything that she has to say about. Are you there? Oh, I lost you.
Yeah, you crashed on my side, so I decided to restart.
Okay, yay, because you have lots to say. That's really interesting to me. So I was just saying that leaving spaces for people, leaving physical space for people in the room to chat and have a break and maybe not be so overwhelmed by being engaged with things is also important when you're deciding how to break up the space, right?
Yeah, and I think for all the people making, just be aware where people are coming from. If
be aware of what their journey is.
Yeah, if they've just come out of a enormous extravaganza with glitter and disco balls, like, what does that mean that you're on the other side of the door? What does that mean for your piece?
How do they feel about that? Yeah.
How do they feel about that, and how do you want to play with that? Do you want to pull the energy through? Do we want to juxtapose them? If you want to juxtapose it, do you want to juxtapose that in people's face? You want to create a sort of gentle come down and send them, is your piece about changing that mood, or is it about letting that fly further? Or I think that's a really interesting thing to play with within the context, because normally you don't get that, and I think it might open up new ways of looking at especially beginnings and ends of pieces for you.
Yeah.
What does it mean that the audience comes in, and do they roam through? Do they trickle through, or do you close the door and then have people there for 6 minutes and then open the door again? Like, how do you deal with audience flow? And I think that will be a really interesting place for musical writers to experiment with, because I think it's an underexplored space probably for them.
Yeah, really. And also I think there's something really interesting in things like, do you invite an audience into a room through an open door and then close the door and then perform behind the door where they can't see you? Do you know, so they're in a room and they don't know what's going on, and the whole show happens where they can hear it but they can't see it. So that you hear running feet, you hear knocking on the door, you hear people calling out. You know, do you do that? Is there some of that ways of using the space?
I think there's a real range of possibilities, and so much to experiment with. The other thing I would highly encourage for the weekend is to try things out on each other, because I think I've been making work with audiences for a long time, and I work really iteratively, as in I make something, show it, remake it, show it, remake it, show it, because I think audiences respond and behave and move and do different things than you think.
Yeah. And the temptation for me is when you first present something that's a new way of engaging an audience, and the audience doesn't do what you had imagined they would or what you hoped they would, the temptation is to stop and go, no, you're doing that wrong. and to remember that there is no wrong for the
audience. Can't get it wrong because you've invited them to play, so they're just playing now.
Yeah.
So if you have a particular framework in which you want them to play, or then you need to build that into your instructions or your narrative. Like, I like to do a lot with narrative. I made a piece called Art Heist in which the audience robbed the art gallery. Obviously, I didn't want them to destroy the art gallery. So the narrative was about a switcheroo between a fake and a real art piece, and no one should know that the heist had happened, because the piece would become worthless if they knew that this switch has taken place. So within the narrative, there couldn't be a nick on anything in the art gallery, and people didn't quite, because narratively that became really important.
Yeah.
But there are ways of sort of writing narrative towards certain behaviors.
Yeah.
Like you do with normal characters, and then you put obstacles in the way so that it's not too easy. But I think playing with that, I think, is really exciting.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about how to use the space and what to respond to in the space, and we've talked about looking at what everybody else is doing and what the main journey is. I guess my question is one of collaboration then, because you're working with a lot of people who are working with, so you're all in small teams making a thing, because we're working in open space. So you're all in small teams making a thing, but you're also working in bigger teams making a thing. Is there a way that, I don't know, what is that about that collective collaboration thing? Is it continuously reaching out? Is it a making your own thing and then talking to other people? Is it?
I think I'm all in favor of continuous reaching out, or sort of an ebb and flow of reaching out to going out to getting back. I think for me it would be really important that everyone feels empowered to work, so it doesn't feel like you have to check back if it's okay continuously. So you're empowered to work, but then you keep checking back in with what's happening around you, because opportunities will arise for you. Like, the thing that most people encounter just before you might be developing in a way that it becomes an opportunity for you.
Yeah.
So to keep checking in with that, and using the fact that there are people around to check your own work against, and especially if you're unsure about what the audience might say or do, or how they might feel when you're presenting them with something, you have people around you. So do little shows and tell, share what you're doing, and make sure that you become part of a sort of soundboard for the people around you, because they are literally the environment in which your work takes place. They become your context.
Yeah, and that in many ways, that's your growth, isn't it? I suppose that those conversations are also part of our journey as creative artists within that, the arc of what this weekend is.
Yeah, absolutely. And your audience is changed depending on what they've encountered or how your work is framed. Like my work, I've worked in galleries, I worked in museums, I worked in theatres, and I worked in games festivals. And I know the audience response is to the same thing, is literally different depending on how it's framed. And in this context, other people's work is the framing. So if they've just run riot in the room next door and had this mad party, which they were really part of, if they then have to sit down and shut up in your show, that's fine, but you will have to work on that transition, because everyone is physically almost in a very hot space.
Yeah.
You want to sort of bring them into a more reflective space. Make sure that you provide that journey for them, which could be provided by the guys next door who've driven them mad.
But there's a
you
lovely,
only know that if you keep checking in.
Yeah, and there's a lovely opportunity for collaboration there. And so rather than your tendency to go, look, you guys are being loud and our show is quiet, and that your loud thing is going to be a problem for us because it's going to build the audience up and then they have to come and be quiet for us. So what are we going to do about that? Is less useful than going, great, you're going to really work the audience into a lava.
So there's almost like a little piece in the middle, which could be made by a third person, or you could collaborate on. Like,
what is that? Here's the thing. What's that? An opportunity?
Yeah. What's a transition? Like, it's like a transition between scenes, isn't it? Like, what is the transition that we need the audience to go on to be ready to receive what we want them to receive, or do what we want them to do? Because there might be something really quiet. So then you need to slowly warm them up before they run around and climb the walls. If that's what you want
none of those things are problems. All of those things are opportunities to make.
It's just context, isn't it? And if you as an artist want to achieve something with an audience, you need to think about how you can create a set of circumstances in which the audience will and can and will enjoy and will come with you on that journey.
So how do we
craft?
How do we frame this whole experience for the audience? How do we frame tiny shows for people who are walking in the front door?
I don't know enough about it, to be honest, because I don't think there is one way of doing that.
Okay.
And I don't know enough about the secret narrative. So, I would definitely create a link between the framing, the sort of out-of-world framing, and the story. So what's the story about? And the framing should sort of reflect that. I think you want to have a sort of out-of-world framing.
Yeah.
I think you want the audience to know why you're doing this.
And what we will have. I mean, I'm interested mainly in, my main interest is in supporting the writers in taking risks. And because of that, I don't want the introduction of an audience to be an intimidating thing. And of course it will be, but I want it to just be the next step in the taking of that risk.
Yeah, so I think an out-of-show framing at the start of the experience, I don't know if there is a start or if it's just open door.
There's an arrival time.
There's an arrival time. And I think taking care of that arrival time, and again, we're talking about thresholding. We're talking about people coming off the tube and it's raining or it's really sunny or whatever it is. They're thinking about the babysitter or the dinner they had or didn't have, to get them prepped to enter your space, which is a space where some things work and other things don't work, and get them excited about that they're part of that, rather than just letting them discover that for themselves, I think is really useful. And I think having something sort of out of narrative is really useful. What I think is also nice, sort of artistically, is if that then does have echoes with whatever the narrative is, or works towards the narrative.
Yeah.
So the language changes from front of house language into narrative language with very slowly, so very elegantly, or thematically reflects, the themes of the piece reflect the themes of risk and adventure and all of those things. So I think having those two things interact, but having a very clear threshold, we like to call it, which allows an audience to capitulate into the experience you've set up for them.
Yeah, you have to invite them, don't you? There has to be an invitation into the house. It's like,
but for me, that's part of the artistic choices that you're making, and it's not like that should be the same for every show. I think that's part of the artistic framework.
And it's interesting to me that you've said, you know, that the story is one that is linked thematically to the idea of taking risks and that kind of thing. Because I thought long and hard about what the story would be, and there were many practical reasons why I've made the choice I've made. I mean, I had hoped that I would get rights to something, and then there just wasn't the time or opportunity to go through that process. And in future, I will go through that process. But so I thought so I've thought long and hard about what it could be, and to be honest, I've made a choice that that it was the easiest choice for me to make. And it's not the Wizard of Oz, but it could be.
I think, but you'll find in every story there is, there will be something that resonates with that experience, whether it's about togetherness or experiment, or stories just have a certain amount of resonance with having a weird experience together, or
and also
being in trenches together, or going on a journey together, or the unknown.
They're so flexible, stories, that it's possible that people can, if this is the risk I want to take, I'm going to choose this part of the story because it really demonstrates that thing,
Yeah, and I think that's just the thing. I think, there is no one version of Hamlet, because we replay the same word with different resonances and different times. And I think your story, whatever it is, will have resonances with the experiment as a whole, and actually unearthing those for the audience, and maybe even unearthing those at the beginning of your creative process with everyone might create a nice little path of thought, a line of investigation that you can share with the audience and with each other, that will allow for the audience experience, the narrative, and the creative process to all have a resonance with each other.
Yeah, and also we're doing some capture. So we're doing, so there'll be some film footage, there'll be some stills, there'll be some drawings, and there'll be some hashtagging, and all of that stuff will be continuous, and it will be our response to capturing the process as well as capturing the actual shows. So there will be, some transmedia inflation of the weekend.
Yeah. So I think providing that media with the same framework as you provide the audience, so that I know on my way in to all that capturing, but how to frame it, I think will be really useful again for audience.
Yeah, and I know what I'm looking at, and I know what that I know what the invitation.
Why is this interesting? Why did you do this? That's why it's interesting, isn't it? Why you've done this, and why we're invited into it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I think it's all about invitations. I'm still a little bit obsessed with invitations at the moment, but I think it's true that you make an invitation to an audience member when they leave the front door. The rain makes an invitation to them, or the sun makes them an invitation, or everything.
Yeah.
Till you get to the venue.
It's a good word to use, because an invitation means that you encourage people to come to your party, but you don't force them. And I think the same with writing towards audience engagement or around audience engagement. It's creating a framework that invites people to become part of it. That invites people to think about certain things, but also can deal with audience members that go slightly off piste with it.
Yeah, and you can come to it. You can rock up at a party and spend the evening in the kitchen, or you can rock up at a party and stay 5 minutes and go, "It's too loud for me, I'm leaving," or whatever you want. You never know. You never know what's going to happen when you accept an invitation.
Absolutely, and I think a good piece allows a range of audience response to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to me about all of that and squishing me into what I know is a very busy schedule for you at the moment.
Thank you.
Hopefully, I know that you can't make it for tiny shows, but hopefully you can engage some with the transmedia aspect of it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I would love to know what you think of that if you get to follow us. We will hashtag tiny shows. So that. And at some point, please come and talk to me again about the work that you make and what you think about musical theatre and all of that malarkey.
I would definitely do that. Good luck. I'm really excited, and I will keep an eye on everything that you send out into the ether.
You'll hear about it from Tassos as well, because he is coming to be in the space with us to be crazy a little bit.
Right.
So he'll probably froth at you about it. So I'm after. Thank you, darling.
You're very welcome, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Have fun. Bye.